She's financially irresponsible, ask anyone, my mother said into the microphone during her reception toast, smiling like this was affectionate. She probably buried him in debt already, my Uncle Darren added from his table, and a few people laughed, not loudly, just enough to sting. My jaw locked so hard it hurt. Then my husband stood and asked the DJ to pause the music, and my mother's voice cracked, "No, don't do this, please. My name is Emily Whittaker. I'm 31. If I'm being honest, that toast didn't start at my wedding. It started when I was little. My mother, Lorraine Whittaker, used to say I just didn't have the head for numbers. She said it lightly at first, like a personality trait. If I got birthday cash from relatives, she would hold out her hand before I even finished opening the card. She called it keeping it safe. Same with babysitting money when I was 13. Same with the checks from my part-time job at a bookstore in high school. She said banks charged fees. She said I'd lose the envelope. She said I'd forget what I spent it on. And every time, I handed it over. The first few times I asked about it later, she would sigh, not angrily, just tired, like I had disappointed her. She'd remind me how I'd once misplaced a $20 bill or miscounted change at the grocery store. She'd tell me I had a pattern, that I was impulsive, that she was protecting me from myself. After a while, I stopped asking. It's strange how quickly doubt becomes identity. By 14, if something didn't add up, I assumed I was the problem. If I couldn't remember exactly what I spent, I decided I must have been careless. My sister Tessa was always described as the responsible one. She kept her own envelopes. She tracked things neatly, or at least that's what I was told. The comparison was quiet but constant. I internalized it without realizing I was doing it. When I was 16, my grandfather, Raymond Cole, died. I remember standing in my black dress at the funeral home, the air thick with flowers and hushed voices. He had always slipped me small bills in folded napkins when my mom wasn't looking. He used to tell me to save it for something I chose. A few weeks after he passed, I asked my mom, carefully, if he had left anything for Tessa or me. I didn't ask because I expected something big. I just wondered. She told me no. She said he'd had debts. She said there was nothing left to give. The way she said it made it feel almost inappropriate that I'd asked. Like I was being greedy. I remember feeling embarrassed. I apologized. And that was it. I didn't question it. I didn't ask to see paperwork. I didn't talk to anyone else about it. Why would I? I already believed I wasn't good with money. I already believed she was better equipped to understand those things. Looking back, that's the part that unsettles me most. Not that she controlled the money. Not even that she took it. It's that she built the foundation so early that when she said there was nothing, I accepted it completely. I didn't doubt her. I doubted myself. By the time I was 23, I had moved out and started freelancing as a web designer. It was supposed to feel independent. I had my own apartment, my own clients, invoices going out under my name. On paper, it looked like I was building something. But my finances never felt stable. Money would come in, decent money sometimes, and yet my balances always seemed thinner than they should have been. I blamed irregular client payments at first. Freelancing is unpredictable. Some months are strong, others aren't. I told myself that was normal. Still, there were moments that didn't sit right. I'd log into an account I rarely used and see small withdrawals I didn't remember making. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed emergency. Just enough to create that tight feeling in my chest. I would scroll through transactions late at night, cross-referencing emails and receipts, trying to reconstruct my own decisions. And almost every time, I'd land on the same conclusion. I must have forgot. If I brought it up to my mother, which I sometimes did out of habit, she would listen with that same patient, faintly disappointed tone she'd used since I was a teenager. She'd remind me that freelancing required discipline, that it was easy to miscalculate taxes, that I had always struggled with organization. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. The doubt was already there. I remember once standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at my laptop screen while she gently explained how easy it was to confuse pending transactions with cleared ones. By the end of the call, I was apologizing. Again, even though I hadn't actually done anything wrong. The pattern repeated for years. Confusion, quiet panic, call her, accept explanation, move on. Then one evening, when I was 27, Tessa and I were having dinner together. It was casual, takeout containers on her coffee table, a show playing in the background. We were talking about nothing important when she mentioned something about Grandpa's account. It was quick, almost absent-minded. I froze, not dramatically, I just stopped chewing. She immediately corrected herself, brushed it off, shifted the subject, but the phrase stayed in the air. Grandpa's account. Later that night, driving home, it replayed in my head in a loop. If there had been debts, like Mom said, what account? Why phrase it that way? I didn't confront Tessa. I didn't call my mother. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I did what I had been trained to do. I turned the suspicion inward. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe Tessa misspoke. Maybe I was overthinking it because money always made me anxious. But something had shifted. For the first time, when I logged into my accounts and saw those small withdrawals, I didn't immediately assume I had imagined them. I didn't immediately reach for my phone to call my mother. I just stared at the screen longer than usual. Not ready to confront, but no longer fully convinced that I was the problem. I met Daniel Hayes when I was 28. It wasn't dramatic, no lightning bolt moment. We were introduced through mutual friends at a small dinner, and I remember thinking he seemed steady, observant, the kind of person who listened all the way through before responding. At some point in the evening, someone mentioned his job, forensic accountant, and I made a joke about being financially hopeless. It was automatic, a reflex. He didn't laugh the way people usually did. He tilted his head slightly, like he was filing something away. We started seeing each other casually at first. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekends. He wasn't flashy or loud, and he didn't need to be. There was something grounding about him. I didn't feel judged around him, which was new. As we got more serious, conversations naturally shifted toward the future, shared expenses, long-term goals, whether I wanted to keep freelancing or expand into an agency. It was practical, adult stuff. The kind of planning I usually felt slightly embarrassed navigating. One night, we were sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I had pulled up my accounts because we were discussing potentially moving in together the following year. I warned him before he even looked. "I'm not great at this," I said, almost apologetically. "I've always been bad with money." He didn't contradict me immediately. He just started reviewing the statements the way someone trained to look for anomalies would, slowly, methodically. His expression didn't change much, but he became quieter, more focused. After about 20 minutes, he leaned back in his chair. "These aren't random," he said carefully. I felt my stomach drop. I assumed he meant mistakes, my mistakes. But he didn't look annoyed. He looked analytical. He pointed out patterns in the withdrawals I had stopped questioning, recurring movements at odd intervals, amounts that didn't align with my spending habits, transactions from accounts I barely touched. He asked if I had authorized certain transfers. I shook my head, but even as I did, I felt the old reflex rising. Maybe I had forgotten. Instead of accepting that, he asked for more documentation. Older statements, archived records. He wasn't accusatory, he wasn't emotional, he was curious. And for the first time, someone wasn't reinforcing the narrative that I was careless. He didn't say, "You're irresponsible." He said, "This deserves a closer look." That shift was small, but it was seismic inside me. I remember sitting there, watching him scroll, realizing I had never once reviewed my own finances without assuming I was the weak link. I had always entered the conversation pre-defeated. Daniel wasn't approaching it that way at all. He wasn't trying to protect me from myself. He was trying to protect me from something else. I didn't know what yet, but for the first time, I allowed the possibility, quietly, cautiously, that maybe I hadn't imagined the inconsistencies. And maybe I wasn't the problem. After a few weeks of going through my statements with Daniel, he asked for something I hadn't even considered: my social security number linked accounts. He wanted to trace everything tied to it, every record going back a decade. My chest tightened when he explained why. Even the thought that someone could have opened accounts in my name without my knowledge made my stomach turn. It didn't take long before the first anomaly appeared, then a second, and finally a third. 3 separate accounts, all tied to my social security number, all active for years. Accounts I had never opened, never authorized. Each one showed a steady stream of withdrawals, small at first, almost casual, but over time it added up. The numbers alone were alarming, but the timeline was worse. Daniel traced the first entries to the year after my grandfather, Raymond Cole, had passed. I remember sitting there at the dining table, papers spread across the wood, heart hammering, as Daniel quietly explained what he was seeing. "Look here," he said. "The first withdrawals start about 6 months after his death. There's a pattern to the transfers." I nodded numbly, gripping my coffee mug so tightly I left dents in the ceramic. My mind spun. Could it really be her? My mother? The woman who had raised me, who had held my childhood savings. My throat tightened as the dread settled fully in my chest. Something I'd felt but couldn't name was now concrete. Needed proof. Daniel suggested we pull the original will from the courthouse. I remember feeling nervous, almost afraid to see it. When we finally obtained it, my hands shook as I read my grandfather's words. $212,000 set aside in a trust for Tessa and me, to be divided when we turned 22, with my mother named as administrator. The handwriting was familiar, solid, genuine. Relief mingled briefly with a rising anger. At least Grandpa had done right by us. Then came the second will. It had been filed months after his death, and it was different, conveniently different. The trust had been removed entirely. The signature was off, subtle but enough that Daniel's trained eye caught it immediately. My stomach sank. My fingers dug into the edge of the table as he compared the two side by side. The timeline, the withdrawals, the forged will, it all pointed in one direction. I felt a mix of disbelief and horror. My mother hadn't just mismanaged the money, she had redirected it. Quietly, meticulously, for over a decade. Every withdrawal, every small adjustment in my accounts suddenly made sense. My self-doubt, my confusion, the uneasy feeling I'd carried all these years, it hadn't been mine to bear. It had been hers, woven carefully into the fabric of my life. Sitting there in that apartment, surrounded by statements, wills, and spreadsheets, I realized something else too. The trust my grandfather had created wasn't lost because of mismanagement or forgetfulness. It had been stolen by someone who had spent years teaching me to believe I was incapable of managing anything myself. That knowledge pressed down on me, heavier than any number on a page. And for the first time, the woman who had defined my limitations wasn't just in my head. She was real, present, tangible, and I could finally see the full scope of what had been done. I remember dialing my mother's number with my hand trembling slightly, gripping the phone as if it could anchor me. Daniel had advised me to stay calm, no accusations, just questions, and he had the recorder running silently on speaker, hidden so she wouldn't know. I told myself it was just a conversation, just clarity. Her voice came through, warm and familiar, but with a faint undertone I hadn't noticed before. Control. "Hello," she said casually. "Hi, Mom," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. "I was looking at some old records, and I wanted to ask you about Grandpa's trust." There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough to make me swallow hard. "I redirected the funds," she said casually, as if she were talking about where she put the laundry. I froze mid-breath, my stomach twisted, my throat felt tight, but I didn't interrupt. She continued, explaining almost breezily that she had taken the money because she believed Tessa and I would waste it, and that she had every right to decide when we were ready to manage it. Her tone wasn't angry, not defensive in the way I had imagined it might be. It was matter-of-fact, almost entitled, layered with this quiet condescension that made my skin crawl. "You weren't ready," she said, as if she were lecturing a teenager instead of acknowledging a decades-long deception. "I was protecting you. That's what a mother does." I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. I wanted to yell, I wanted to cry. My jaw tightened so much it hurt, but Daniel's voice in my mind, calm, measured, careful, reminded me to breathe, not a reaction, not yet. This was documentation, evidence. It was surreal hearing her justify it. All the patterns I'd noticed, all the withdrawals I had second-guessed myself over, all the moments I had felt incompetent, it was real. And it wasn't me. Her entitlement was suffocating. She spoke with this quiet authority, as if she alone had been rational, and Tessa and I were just incapable children who needed correction. Every sentence dripped with the casual audacity of someone who had rewritten history for their own benefit. And me, I held it all in. My face was still, my voice measured. But inside, everything was vibrating: rage, disbelief, grief, the sharp sting of betrayal. It was a rupture I had to contain, a tension knot I could feel threading down my arms and through my chest. My fingers hovered over the phone, trembling as if my body couldn't decide whether to collapse or explode. By the time she finished explaining, I was quiet. Not because I accepted it, not because I forgave it. I just listened, recorded, internalized, every word a nail in a coffin I hadn't yet opened for her. That conversation, calm on the surface but devastating underneath, confirmed what Daniel had suspected. It was deliberate. It was personal. It was betrayal in its purest, most intimate form. And for the first time, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I wasn't imagining the inconsistencies. I wasn't at fault. My mother had chosen this path, and I had proof. After that call, Daniel and I made a decision. Nothing would be confronted publicly until every piece of documentation was in place. We had 8 weeks until the wedding. 8 weeks to quietly gather evidence, organize statements, wills, and the recordings. 8 weeks to prepare for a confrontation that couldn't be ignored. I told myself over and over that this was strategic, not personal, that restraint now would give us the leverage later. And then my mother shifted. Almost overnight, she became unusually involved in the planning. She called about the linens, the flowers, seating arrangements. She offered to help coordinate vendors, to supervise timelines, to make sure everything went smoothly. I felt my skin tighten every time she mentioned a task. Part of me wanted to refuse, but another part realized there was a tactical advantage. She was positioning herself in plain sight, thinking she could control the narrative, unaware that we already had the truth waiting. One afternoon, she called me directly, her voice lighter than usual. "Emily," she said, "I'd like to give a special toast at your reception. You know, something heartfelt for my daughter. I think everyone would love it." There was no hesitation in her tone, only that familiar undertone of expectation, as if I owed her this moment. I paused, letting silence stretch for a beat before answering. Inside, I felt a mix of dread and a strange, controlled amusement. "All right, Mom," I said. "You can give a toast." My voice was calm, neutral, deliberately so. No enthusiasm, no warmth beyond what was socially polite. I wanted her to feel confident, to walk to the microphone thinking she was in command. She didn't know that every word she planned to say could soon be undermined. She didn't know that the recording of her admission, the wills, the financial patterns, all of it was quietly organized and ready. She believed she was securing her moment, her legacy in front of our friends and family. I allowed her that illusion. During those weeks, she inserted herself into nearly every conversation about the wedding. She suggested details, offered opinions, and sometimes pressed for quick answers. Each interaction was a test, a reminder of the tension I had carried for years, now reframed in this public context. I kept my responses measured, careful, never betraying the knowledge that had settled like ice in my chest. It was strange, walking the line between patience and power. I had to remind myself constantly to breathe, to maintain calm, to let her move freely, thinking she held control. Every invitation she sent, every vendor she called, every checklist she scrutinized was another moment where I had to bite back a reaction that might reveal the truth prematurely. By the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, she was fully convinced she was an integral, beloved part of the celebration. She laughed at the right moments, posed for pictures, and gently nudged me towards small acknowledgments that reinforced her presence. And I allowed it all carefully, strategically, with a quiet, simmering awareness that the real reckoning wasn't coming from me in those weeks. It was coming from Daniel, the evidence, and the truth. For the first time in a long while, I felt a calm purpose in the chaos, not reactive, not defensive. I was observing, letting her play her part, while the entire framework for exposure quietly solidified behind the scenes. The reception hall was glowing, full of soft lights, and the low murmur of 170 guests enjoying the first meal of the evening. I had walked through the entrance with Daniel earlier, feeling a mix of exhilaration and nerves, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment my mother took the microphone. She stood straight-backed, clutching the mic with a practiced ease, and began speaking in that familiar sing-song tone I knew so well, the one she used when she wanted everyone to think she was caring, concerned, and morally right. "Emily," she started, her voice loud enough to carry across the room, "has always been, well, financially irresponsible. Ask anyone. She probably buried Daniel in debt already, she added, glancing toward him with a thinly veiled smirk. The words hit like ice. My stomach knotted instantly. Heat rose to my face, my jaw tightened, and I felt a subtle tremor through my arms. I could hear a few uncomfortable shifts in chairs behind us, whispered murmurs that made my ears ring. I could see some guests exchanging glances, caught between amusement and unease. And then my Uncle Darren spoke up from his table, chuckling lightly but adding to the tension. "Yeah, that sounds about right," he said. The laughter that followed was uneasy, scattered. Not the warm, celebratory kind, the laughter that lands uncomfortably in a room where people glance around, wondering if they should react at all. I froze for a moment, the sound of her words coating the air like a sticky weight. I remember feeling my throat tighten so sharply that swallowing became an effort. My hands gripped the sides of my chair until my knuckles were white, the sudden awareness of every eye in the room on me pressing against my ribs. My heart was pounding like it wanted to escape, but I forced myself to sit upright, to maintain some composure while internally reeling. Her tone softened slightly, and she leaned into the microphone, as if to show she was only speaking out of love and concern. "I just worry about her making life-altering decisions," she said, her voice careful now, layered with feigned empathy. "That's why I feel the need to warn people, to make sure no one gets hurt." Every word was a calculated effort to position herself as the virtuous parent, the one safeguarding the innocent, the moral anchor of the room. She was transforming the moment into a staged scene of protection, while everyone around me, including me, knew the truth simmering beneath the surface. I could feel the tension tightening, coiling in my chest, the familiar mixture of anger, disbelief, and humiliation rising sharply. My body was on high alert, each subtle shift in the audience, a cough, a glance, a pause, amplifying the surreal weight of her performance. She wanted to be the center of attention, the hero of the story, and I sat there, silent but burning inside, knowing the scales would tip soon. The moment had been building like a tight coil, and Daniel moved with quiet precision. He stood from our table, caught my eye, and nodded ever so slightly. Then he asked the DJ to pause the music. The sudden silence was immediate, thick, and oppressive. Conversations halted mid-word, glasses were set down gently, almost trembling with curiosity. All 170 guests turned toward him. "I'm Daniel Hayes," he began, his voice calm but carrying effortlessly across the room. "I'm a forensic accountant, and I've been reviewing certain financial matters concerning my fiancé's family trust." There was no hesitation, no flourish, just a matter-of-fact authority that immediately drew attention. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her carefully maintained composure. He motioned to the projector, and the screen lit up. Side by side were two documents, one the original will of my grandfather, Raymond Cole, and the other the second, forged version. The difference in signatures and dates was stark, unmistakable, even to those with no knowledge of legal documents. Murmurs ran through the room, but the guests remained seated, eyes fixed, sensing the gravity. Daniel clicked to the next slides, transaction histories from the 3 unauthorized accounts, draining steadily over more than a decade. Every line, every entry, every monthly withdrawal was displayed clearly. The numbers were tangible, undeniable evidence in digital form, irrefutable. I could feel the room shifting, the air thickening with disbelief. My mother's posture stiffened. Her lips pressed together, a subtle tremor running through her jaw as her mind raced. Then Daniel did something I'd been waiting for. He pressed play on the recording. My mother's voice filled the hall, calm, casual, admitting she had redirected the funds because she thought Tessa and I would waste it, and asserting she had the right to decide when we were ready. Every word was laid bare, and the room sank into silence. Some guests exhaled audibly, their faces frozen in shock. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, processing the betrayal in real time. My mother's eyes flicked toward me, then to Daniel, then out at the audience. Her carefully constructed composure began to crack. A hand went to her face, brushing at her mouth as if to stifle a gasp. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her voice caught when she tried to interject, and her confident, concerned parent act faltered into something raw, a mixture of fear, shock, and disbelief. She had expected to control the narrative, to stage a performance that humiliated me. Instead, she had become the subject of exposure. I could feel my own pulse slowing, a tense satisfaction settling over me, the long years of doubt and confusion suddenly converging into clarity. The silence was electric, the gravity of truth settling like a tangible weight in the room. The moment she had thought would assert her authority now revealed the exact opposite. Every lie, every manipulation, every diverted dollar fully visible. And through it all, she remained standing, visibly unraveling, while the room absorbed the stark, undeniable truth laid bare before them. The moment the recording ended, a charged silence settled over the room, heavy enough that I could almost hear my own heartbeat echoing against the walls. My sister, Tessa, rose from her chair, her expression sharp and unflinching. She stepped toward our mother with a controlled intensity I hadn't seen since we were kids. "I'm done pretending," Tessa said, her voice low but carrying through the hush. "Do you want to explain how my college tuition was supposedly from savings when you were using the money for yourself?" The words hit like a hammer, precise and undeniable. My mother's mouth opened, closed, and then stammered something that no one seemed to hear clearly over the weight of her guilt. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between my mother and Tessa, sensing the eruption of truth unfolding in real time. A few of my Aunt Maribel's friends whispered across tables, comparing stories they'd never connected before. One relative leaned over to another and muttered about odd misunderstandings over inheritance and expenses that suddenly made sense. The ripple spread quickly. More family members exchanged shocked glances, quietly confirming their suspicions against the pattern now glaringly exposed. I could feel the room changing, the social dynamic flipping in slow motion. My mother had always commanded attention in these gatherings, the assumed moral and social authority she wielded as the matriarch of our family. Now that authority was cracking, her carefully curated reputation crumbling as relatives silently recalculated the balance of trust and respect. People who had once deferred to her now hesitated, unsure how to interact with her, their subtle body language betraying the shift. Guests began leaving in small, polite clusters, murmuring apologies as they departed. Some hugged Tessa and me, whispering support, while others simply shook their heads, visibly shaken by the revelations. Even those who stayed were quieter, the festive energy of the reception dampened, replaced by an almost tangible acknowledgement that the social hierarchy had been overturned. Through it all, I watched my mother, frozen in a combination of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. Her face, usually composed and controlled, had become a canvas of unraveling emotions, cheeks flushed, eyes darting, hands twitching nervously as if she wanted to erase the evidence of her own culpability from the room. The power she had wielded for decades, so carefully maintained through manipulation and charm, had evaporated in an instant, replaced by the authority of truth and evidence. Tessa stayed close, her hand brushing mine, a quiet reassurance amid the chaos. The family who remained began quietly aligning themselves with us, exchanging nods and whispered acknowledgments that we were in the right and that the moment was ours. My mother, once the dominant force in the room, now existed in a vacuum of exposure, isolated by the very audience she had intended to impress. For the first time in my life, the long-standing imbalance, the doubt, the control, the hidden manipulations, had been dismantled in full view of those who mattered most. The weight of years of secrecy lifted slightly, replaced with a sense of vindication and clarity that I had scarcely allowed myself to imagine. After the chaos of the reception settled, Daniel and I moved quickly but deliberately to formalize everything. We met with our estate litigation attorney, Rebecca Lawson, a sharp, meticulous woman who immediately recognized the strength of our case. She went through every document, every transaction, every recorded admission, and made it clear. The law was firmly on our side. Within days, we filed a civil lawsuit to recover the trust funds and formally petitioned to remove my mother from any fiduciary role over family finances. My mother scrambled at first, hiring a lawyer who seemed confident, maybe even dismissive of the evidence we had meticulously compiled. But when he reviewed Daniel's forensic report and listened to the recording, he quickly realized the case was airtight. She dismissed him abruptly, insisting she could handle things herself, but word spread, and no other firm wanted to take her on once they saw the documentation. For the first time, her usual network of support and intimidation offered her nothing. 4 months later, the court issued its judgment. The full $212,000 trust, plus accrued interest, was ordered repaid, bringing the total to just over $246,000. The ruling included a permanent bar preventing her from acting as executor, trustee, or holding any power of attorney within the family. The judge's words were precise, leaving no room for appeal or reinterpretation. The authority she had abused for so long was stripped away completely. An additional audit uncovered roughly $18,000 in other unauthorized transfers, which we were able to reclaim, and my Aunt Maribel successfully recovered $27,500 in a related civil claim. The social consequences mirrored the legal ones. Her church quietly asked her to step back from financial committees, removing the veneer of trust she had carefully cultivated in her community. For the first time in decades, my mother's influence, carefully wielded and maintained, had been fully dismantled. A few months after the ruling, I received a letter from her. The focus wasn't restitution or apology, it was embarrassment. She lamented how humiliated she felt, how awkward everything had become. I responded once, calmly, firmly, establishing boundaries and making it clear that any future contact required honesty and accountability. There was no room for manipulation or repetition of past harms. 6 months after the wedding, I finally allowed myself to feel the breadth of the shift. My marriage to Daniel feels stable, safe, and honest in a way I had never experienced. Tessa and I rebuilt our relationship without comparison or competition, communicating openly about money, life choices, and the family we choose to maintain. The house of lies and control my mother had maintained for decades no longer casts a shadow over our lives. The finality of the court ruling, combined with the exposure at the reception and the dismantling of her authority, created a permanent shift in family power. The imbalance that had dominated my life for 31 years was gone. The weight lifted, leaving a tangible sense of dominance, clarity, and security. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more real-life family stories. There are other stories in the description that will keep you on the edge of your seat.